The summer has become the time for NBA superstars to change locations, but the midseason trade deadline holds a unique and tantalizing possibility. My team could get significantly better overnight. It's an idea so seductive that it has us sitting on the couch, on the subway, in coffee shops,
to make sure that we see it when and if it happens.
But what does history tell us about the power and the possibility of the midseason trade? Is any of this worth getting excited about? This is a time in the NBA calendar year where the needs of the building team and the needs of the contending team tend to overlap. The successful scenarios play out nearly the same way every single time. A contending team wants a player that's an established, quality producer. Said player is often nearing the end of or just past their prime and due to get paid. Said player's team typically doesn't want to pay them, but also doesn't want to let them walk for nothing. To me, there are two types of midseason moves, at least as it pertains to contending for the title. The first is the shot in the arm. This is where a team with championship pedigree brings in a qualified performer to give the merry-go-round one big push. Sort of like when an established band brings in an extra musician to expand the attack and freshen it up a bit. The shot in the arm has happened 3 times. The San Antonio Spurs were downright masterful at tooling and retooling the pieces around their longtime big three of Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, and Manu Ginobili. And in 2005, they made a boring but responsible move at the deadline by swapping the scrappy Malik Rose for the steady Nazr Mohammed. Big Naz was no star, but he crept into the starting lineup by the playoffs and helped San Antonio win their 3rd title of the Timmy D era. For the 1987 Lakers, it was more about preparing for a specific team, the Boston Celtics, and more specifically, Kevin McHale. McHale's dominance needed a counter, and an aging center for the Spurs posed a possible answer. Michael Thompson, aside from being Clay's dad and one of the funniest people on Twitter, was a former #1 pick and a former college teammate of Kevin McHale's. The Lakers managed to pry him away from San Antonio in a midseason deal, and in back-to-back seasons he provided a bench scoring punch and defensive support for Kareem. Just a general rule of thumb for the trade deadline that's remained true for like 30 years. If Jerry West calls, do not pick up.
Do not let him speak. He will put a spell on us.
The last shot in the arm was the 1994-95 Houston Rockets. Clyde the Glide was dissatisfied in 1995. He'd given his entire career to the Portland Trail Blazers, and perceived disrespect from new management had him wanting to leave town. The defending champion Houston Rockets were in a funk of their own, and making his own grim projections, Rudy Tomjanovich decided that swapping Otis Thorpe for Clyde Drexler was the right move. It took some time for the pieces to fit in Houston. With Hakeem Olajuwon out for the final 8 games of the season, the team went 15-18 to finish the year and looked on the verge of imploding. When Hakeem re-entered the lineup, things slowly started to click, and the Rockets found a way to beat 2 60-win teams in the playoffs before going on and sweeping Shaq, Penny, and the Orlando Magic in the finals. The second type of successful midseason trade is when a team has been knocking on the door and they need that extra something to help them seal the deal. These are the over-the-hump moves, and there are 3 of them. In 1989, it seemed like the Pistons were maturing at the perfect time, finally in a position to seize the moment between the decline of the Bird Magic era and the start of Michael Jordan's dominance. But something needed to be tweaked. Adrian Dantley was a 2-time scoring champion, at one point posting 4 consecutive seasons of at least 30 points per game. But Detroit's push towards physical defensive speed and better offensive spacing had made Dantley's ISO-dominant approach obsolete. So they swapped him in February of 1989 for Mark Aguirre, who was a Dallas Maverick at the time. Looking back, it's kind of funny that Detroit's solution for offloading a grumpy ball-dominant scorer was to trade for another grumpy ball-dominant scorer. Sort of like swapping a pet cobra because your pet rattlesnake bit you? Aguirre offered nearly identical production to Dantley, but he was younger, he was cheaper, and perhaps most importantly, he and Isaiah Thomas were childhood best friends. The Pistons were 33-13 before the move, and they finished the season 30-6 before roaring into the playoffs and losing only 2 games, eventually winning the title over the LA Lakers. This one may never be topped, but the summer of 2002, Joe Dumars had turned the Pistons into a competent playoff team, but they needed one more piece to make them special. After a fun but up-and-down stint in Portland, Rasheed Wallace was a rare type of player to be available at the deadline, a player in his prime and a current all-star. After a 10-day stop in Atlanta that would birth one of the truly great NBA eBay quests ever, Detroit welcomed Wallace with open arms. It was instantly apparent that Wallace was perfect for the Pistons. Detroit won 20 of their final 26 games, and their defensive rating dropped from 96.4 to 88.3 after Wallace joined the lineup. They were punishing teams with their ball pressure, physicality, and the institution of the famous no-fly zone. The Pistons went on to effectively serve as the endpoint for the Shaq-Kobe Lakers and contended for the next 4 seasons. Memphis has to be at least a little frustrated. On 2 separate occasions, they had a Gasol brother, both all-star level players, both likely Hall of Famers, and they traded both away, only to see them go to immediately win a championship with their next team. Still, if you love somebody, it's best to set them free. And that's what Memphis did at the deadline in 2019 when they sent Marc Gasol to the surging Toronto Raptors. Capitalizing on the presence of a transcendent player like Kawhi was something that Masai Ujiri clearly felt that he had to do.
Gasol had definitely fallen off a bit from his heyday,
But he was still one of the highest IQ defensive centers that we've seen in a while, and mature enough to accept a lesser role. You know the rest of the story. The Raptors grinded their way through the playoffs, eventually beating Golden State in the finals, and Marc Gasol, deservedly, got very drunk. So, not a ton of examples of a big midseason trade leading directly to a title, but looking at this kind of trade and saying that it caused a title is sort of a false correlation. It's easy to get caught up in thinking that the last piece of a team is the most important, but that's a flawed way to look at it. Sure, your team might not be a move away from a title, but you never know what the move before the move might be.
It's also important not to get caught up in rings culture or needing a trade to flip an immediate switch. There have been a ton of midseason moves that have led to playoff success a short time later.
Like when the Utah Jazz traded for Jeff Hornacek near the deadline in 1994. It took a couple years, but Hornacek would go on to form an incredible on-court bond with John Stockton, and the Jazz reached the finals in 1997 and 1998. Seattle traded Derek McKee midseason to Indiana for Detlef Schrempf in 1993, who was important to their playoff runs to come. Portland landed Kevin Duckworth midseason in 1987, and he became the starting center for their great run from 1989 to 1992. In January of 1997, the Lakers made a trade for Robert Horry, a guy who made and delivered a variety of history-altering shots. Aaron McKie and Eric Snow to the Sixers in 1997, Trevor Ariza to the Lakers in 2007, Derek Harper to the Knicks in 1994, all seemingly medium splash moves that had significant results. Also, people forget, but arguably the most important trade in New York Knicks history happened midseason, when New York traded Walt Bellamy and Howard Kamives for Dave DeBusschere. Before he became associated with one of the biggest conspiracy theories of all time, DeBusschere was a Hall of Fame level player, and this tweak to New York's core lineup would set them up to win 2 championships, one in 1970 and another in 1973. Frankly, you're much more likely to land an impact draft asset. A ton of draft picks that would go on to become exceptionally good NBA players have been moved over the years at the trade deadline. So should you be excited about the trade deadline? With the right expectations? Yeah, I guess so. For the imminent chance that your team is going to morph into a Titan, sorry to be the wet blanket, but probably not. But keep in mind that in the 73 seasons that we've had NBA basketball, there's essentially no example of a zero-to-hero midseason trade. Each and every single time something works, it's because an organization put in a massive amount of work constructing a roster leading up to that moment. It happens because preparation met opportunity.
and the preparation is the part that you just can't skip.
Let me know if you agree.